Welcome to Hoops HD, everybody. This is another one of our Hoops HD reports. I'm your host, Chad Sherwood, joined by a whole panel of Hoops HD experts here,
Can't see.
including David Griggs, John
I can't
Titel,
see.
Rocco Miller from Bracketeer.org.
Chad,
And
I
we also
can't
got
see.
somebody. Uh,
Why aren't we on TV?
we're doing an audio-only
Oh,
podcast
oh,
tonight,
all
and we've
right.
got a very special guest with us from Fox Sports, Aaron Torres. And John Titel, I know you invited Aaron to join us, so why don't you introduce him, and we'll go from there.
I'd be happy to. For everybody, Aaron has covered college basketball and football and other sports for a long time. He's written books. He does podcasts. He does a weekly top 25. I think that he's going to be a great addition tonight. And Aaron, as Chad said earlier, we're really happy that you're with us, and thank you so much for coming on tonight.
Pleasure is mine, fellas, and yeah, it's a fun time of year. A lot going on in college hoops. So yeah, happy to talk some hoops with you guys.
Great, and Aaron, I know you wrote a couple books that are out there that you can order. I think get right off of Amazon. The One and Fun, the story of the 2010 Kentucky team, and the story of the 2011 UConn team, the ugliest champion. Unlikeliest champion. I'm sorry, I said ugliest. But that might be true too from that.
Yeah.
That was the 2019 Virginia Cavaliers. They weren't always pretty, but they got the job done.
I would concur and be very happy about that.
Yeah.
But Aaron, just what are you doing now? You're doing a lot of podcasting now. Is that correct?
Yeah, guys. I've done a lot of stuff through the years. I was at foxsports.com for a long time, and they basically shut down the whole website. And so, it's part of the nature of anyone's business. People gain jobs and lose jobs every day. Not that big of a deal. But that's really where I started. And since then, I've done a lot of freelance work. I've done some stuff with The Athletic, all sorts of stuff. But yeah, primarily right now, kind of the focus is I host the Fox Sports radio show every Saturday, recapping the big stories in sports, standard national radio show. We talk all sorts of stuff, NBA, NFL, etc. And I host the Aaron Torres Sports Podcast, which is primarily college hoops. I do my college football picks every week, and if something crazy happens somewhere else, we'll touch on that. But for the most part, that's what I'm doing right now. I still do a lot of different writing stuff, and as you guys mentioned, 2 books. Most recent one actually came out in 2015. It was about John Calipari's first year at Kentucky. It's a long story as to why I did that book on that team, but I interviewed John Wall, Patrick Patterson, Eric Bledsoe, Coach Cal. So yeah, man, I'm just kind of one of those guys. I've just been around for a long time doing this stuff. Like you guys, love talking sports, love talking hoops, and spread pretty thin at this time of year, but it's also just a really fun time of year in general. And like I said, excited to join you guys.
Well, let me ask for people that are looking you up here. What's the best way to find you? Is it on Twitter or Facebook or where? Or is it your website?
Yeah. I have best place to get me is on Twitter. It's where I share all my work, and it's Aaron_Torres TORRES. I also have an Instagram page where just linking back to my podcast and all that stuff. So Aaron Torres Sports Podcast is the Instagram page. Facebook, have a little YouTube channel. So like I said, I do all sorts of stuff. And then obviously my Fox Sports radio show is basically available anywhere you're going to be on Saturday. Also the iHeartRadio app. I think the best way to just get what I'm doing, if you enjoy this conversation, is just kind of follow me on Twitter. And then from there, you'll be, brought into my vortex, and all sorts of stuff that I'm doing on a daily basis, you'll be a part of.
So, Aaron, you've written a couple books about Kentucky. They've sort of been big news lately. For the first time in 27 years, the number 1 team in the country lost to what we call under the radar, what other people call mid-major. We hate that term, but that's another story.
Sure.
Kind of had to sweat Utah Valley tonight. Not a whole lot, but they did. Is there reason for concern, or is this just sort of last year we saw Kentucky get blasted by Duke and sweat out UNC Greensboro? I think the year before that they had to sweat out Vermont. I mean, Vermont wasn't bad that year by any means, but is this just your typical Kentucky November, or is there reason to think that they may be in trouble?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think that really outside of the year that they went 38-1, most years it's been like this at Kentucky. And you know, you guys referenced the book that I wrote, One and Fun, about the 2010 team, which was Calipari's first team, John Wall, DeMarcus Cousins, etc. And people forget John Wall's first game at Kentucky,
Miami.
he had to he hit a buzzer beater to beat Miami of Ohio, not University of Miami, not the Miami Heat, Miami of Ohio, in a regular season game. And so this has just been a staple of this program for a good chunk of the Calipari era. I just tweeted this as before we got on air, is, you know, I remember this time last year people saying that you couldn't play Tyler Hero because he contributed nothing you know, he was struggling defensively and he wasn't making up enough for it offensively to make it worth playing him. 6 months later, he is the number 13 pick in the draft. So I think in the big picture, they'll be fine. They are battling some injuries, but in the small picture, I do understand a Kentucky fan's frustration. You know, I mean, I think in 2019, it's not an excuse that you're young, right? Like I use this example, but Arizona's really young. Now, they haven't played the competition overall that Kentucky has played. They don't have the great win like Michigan State on a neutral court. Arizona's really young. They're blowing everybody out. You know, Duke is really young, and they beat Kansas in the Champions Classic and is basically taking care of business against everybody else. Ohio State, although they're, you know, they have a couple returnees, I think they're younger than people realize. So I just think it's one of those where I see both sides. If you're asking me, do I think this team will have it figured out by the middle of March? Do I think they'll be peaking? Do I think they'll have a chance, like every year, to make a deep run potentially to that final weekend, the Final Four? Absolutely. But again, to reiterate, you know, I do also understand the Kentucky fan that's frustrated, you know, as we speak here, because this team just isn't getting things done against what is obviously inferior competition. The last two games, of course, they were great in their opener against Michigan State.
Yeah.
Well, for those that can see on our screen here, we do have, well, we don't have faces on, we do have some standings showing up on the screen here. I know, Aaron,
Sure.
You're calling in, so you can't see them, but I've got the SEC standings up and some recent results for those that are watching on the website. And I think other than Kentucky's exploits both last week and tonight, the other big story in the SEC is the Florida Gators, especially with that loss to UConn over the weekend. That I haven't figured that game out yet. I mean, after UConn looks so bad against St. Joe's, UConn turns around and beats Florida at home. And is this Florida team in trouble? They struggled with Towson as well.
Yeah, guys, I'll tell you, I'm a UConn alum, so I want this win to mean something, and that it's a program changing, you know, top of the resume for an NCAA tournament big kind of win. I just think we overvalued Florida, and this is something, you know, listen, I whiff on a lot of stuff in the preseason like we all do, but I wasn't quite as high on Florida as everybody else. And what I really said was, you know, Kerry Blackshear, who's their star player, anybody listening to this show knows who Kerry Blackshear is. He was a grad transfer from Virginia Tech, and he was a very good player at Virginia Tech last year. But the way that we hyped him up, I mean, I saw him on first-team All-American list. I saw him listed as one of the top 5 players in college basketball coming into this year, and I said, this guy ain't that. And listen, I get why. It's because he was recruited by Kentucky. He was recruited by Tennessee. He was obviously recruited by Florida. He was believed to be the missing piece at all 3 programs. And so, yeah, when you're the final puzzle piece, when you've been a good player in the ACC, I get it. I get why there was excitement about him, but this idea that he was just going to be a 20-10 guy every night at Florida, it never vibed with me. Andrew Nembhard, who's obviously their point guard, if you really look statistically at his season a year ago, really had about 2 or 3, really struggled for most of the year and had about 2 or 3 good games at the right time in the SEC and NCAA tournaments. And again, I think he's another guy that was probably a little overvalued. So I think they're a little overvalued. And I'm telling you right now, you know, I talked about it on my own podcast on Monday. Listen, I think they're a fine team, but Final Four hype, you know, even SEC championship hype, I don't buy it. I think that there are some teams that have looked really good in the SEC early. I have faith that Kentucky will figure it out. I just don't think Florida is or will be what we expected them to be in the preseason, really, frankly, at any point this year.
And well, we got Rocco Miller on the podcast here with us too, and Rocco is a Washington alum, and I think maybe that was the only other game of note in the SEC this past week was his team losing to a Tennessee team that is once again surprising us. Rocco, did you want to address that also?
Yeah, I feel like, the Huskies, obviously came off of a big rally to beat Baylor, but most of that Baylor game in the opener of the Armed Forces Classic, Baylor controlled the pace. Huskies played very sloppy, 15 first half turnovers, and were able to clean up the turnovers in the second half and get Baylor to go through a big scoring drought down the stretch, and just keep feeding Stewart down low. Of course, Isaiah Stewart, the blue chip All-American out of high school. He's just unlike any player we've ever seen come through the Husky program. And what ended up happening between the Tennessee game and the Baylor game is they tried to do a lot of the same things with a lot of people standing around in the outside, not too much offense happening throughout the game, and really struggled with Mount St. Mary's, pulled that out by about 9 or 10 at the end. So when Tennessee came around, Tennessee's got great guards. Huskies did have a big size advantage down low, but the issue continued to progress from the first two games, and a lot of scoring droughts, got down in a hole early, and this time there was no Baylor type scoring drought, and Tennessee was able to just maintain control and cruise to like a 12, 13-point win. So I think the Huskies have a lot to work on offensively. I think the defense will be fine throughout the year, mixing the man with the zone, but also missing Matisse Thybulle from last year. That's an impossible piece to replace. So there's just a few things to work on in the next 6 weeks. But I think by Pac-12 time, there'll still be a top contender in the league.
Yeah.
Go ahead, guys.
Go ahead, Aaron. You want to address that also?
No, I think Rocco basically just summed up most of my thoughts on Washington there. Young team, they're another one. They're a young team, but listen, it's like we were saying with Kentucky, it's not an excuse. And I think the point that Rocco brought up was a really important one, was that there were times where it did not seem like they were going to win that Baylor game and really came on strong down the stretch. But listen, I'll tell you this, man, I just like the guys that they have on that roster at Washington. Obviously, the two freshmen are the kind of the headliners, but some of the vets, Nas Carter and Hamir Wright and guys like that. I think that's going to be a really dangerous team, and I think it's something I'm sure you guys have talked about already. But I think the Pac-12 is vastly, vastly, vastly improved this year. I think it's going to be a fun league to watch.
Yeah, and we were saying before we started the podcast, you're looking at the Pac-12 that with today's rankings, 4 teams in the top 25. Titel, I know you're an Arizona guy there. You want to talk about what's been going on with this Pac-12 conference that only has 3 losses outside of the conference, 4 losses overall total right now.
It's been amazing. I mean, they were atrocious last year, and now they have 8 undefeated teams. I understand it's early. Everybody's got a winning record. I knew that Arizona would be okay. I didn't think they'd be blowing out teams like New Mexico State by 30. As Aaron mentioned, they're very young, but the 2 McDonald's All-Americans in Green and Mannion, and then Zeke Nnaji, who's playing like the Pac-12 Rookie of the Year, has been great. USC, surprising me. I thought they were going to take a little of a downturn this year. They're 4-0. The Huskies, obviously, a few points away from being undefeated. Even some lower-tier teams like Stanford and Cal, obviously, crappy schedules, but still undefeated is undefeated. It can't sustain itself the whole year. I don't think this conference is going to have like 8 teams in the tournament in March, but certainly the early results have been great. And Arizona's schedule, decent. They got Baylor and Gonzaga in non-conference play in the month ahead, so they'll be tested by non-conference teams very quickly. We'll see what they're up for.
Yeah, Cal very close to surpassing last year's win total.
I didn't even realize that last part on Cal. It's a good league though. And yeah. I'll say, I know, you guys just referenced that's a little bit early, but I'll tell you this, I would actually disagree with that a little bit in that it's never too early for the Pac-12 because, this was the time last year where Oregon lost to Texas Southern and USC lost to Santa Clara. And, just myself personally talking to coaches around that league, and I live in LA, so I probably am, probably at the very least around those programs more than most people in the national media. Most of the coaches said, look, the guys are there, the coaches are there, the programs are there. we just got to take care of business. We got to win the games out of conference. So, again, I get that it's early, but it's never too early when Washington is beating a Baylor, when Oregon is beating a Memphis. I know this isn't a huge national radar win, but I thought USC looked really good against Nevada, kind of completely controlled that game on the road. That's not the win that's going to get them into the NCAA tournament, but it's a game that, the Pac-12 just in general hasn't won the last couple of years. So I would just say, as I've said a few times now, in general, it's just good for the league that they're not only winning the games that they're supposed to win, they're starting now to win some of the games that people didn't expect them to win, which is a nice surprise and definitely a big difference from last season.
Well, one of the other big wins we saw, I guess, this week was Utah's win over Minnesota. That was another solid win against a Minnesota team. People are pretty high on it. Maybe we should talk a little Big Ten hoops then, kind of a little segue here, where the Big Ten came up this week with the past week. Actually, the Gavitt Games win 5-3. They won over the Big East with the losses, I guess, being Marquette knocking off Purdue, Minnesota's loss to Utah that I just mentioned, and I'm sorry, Minnesota's lost to Butler, and there was one other loss there, but I guess it was DePaul beat somebody. DePaul win it.
DePaul beat
Iowa.
DePaul beat Iowa. Thank you.
Them,
I didn't have that score on the screen there, but the Big Ten.
You didn't remember the biggest DePaul win in like 15 years, man? No, I'm kidding. I'm kidding.
It slipped my mind. You're absolutely right there. I've got some scores on the screen here, but not from Monday. Going back to Monday, but. Joby, why don't we bring you back into the conversation here? And what we've seen on the Big Ten this past week with at least the 5-3 win in the Gavitt Games Challenge.
Yeah, but I'm staring out at Purdue. Is Purdue doing exactly what they did last year and going to drive us all crazy again last year? Last year, like they did last year, they started off, I think, 7-6, 7-5, and everybody buried them, put them for dead. Then they come roaring back. Now, Carson Edwards isn't there anymore, but but there is some expectation. The Boilers, around the Boilers, will they then blast through, come through, and wind up as a protected seed, as a lot of people projected them to be at the beginning of the year? So far, boy, they haven't looked good. Like last year when they lost to Texas, it was like, wow, close game. Yeah, boom. No, Texas was the better team. And so I focus maybe unfairly on the downside. We addressed Minnesota, but I'm concerned when I see Purdue. Of course, they could burn me just like they burned me last year.
Yeah, but like when you look at this conference, there hasn't been that many teams that have stepped up and won. Like Indiana, Maryland, they're unbeaten, but they've essentially won home bye games. Ohio State blasted Villanova and Cincinnati, so they've kind of gotten it done. A team that I've kind of liked so far is Penn State. And again, comparing it to USC's win against Nevada that we referenced earlier, like winning at Georgetown isn't going to put you into the NCAA tournament in and of itself. But Penn State winning anywhere in recent years, home, away, or wherever, it's kind of been an anomaly. And for them to go out there and get a win like that and be unbeaten, they're kind of overachieving. Michigan State had the big win at Seton Hall, or not Seton Hall, but was it? Yeah, it was Seton Hall. Okay, I'm sorry.
In New Jersey, which is nice.
Yeah, I've got so many things going up in my head that they all kind of collide. But all in all, it isn't like you have a lot of teams that have stepped up and won big games. And I know that we're only in week 3, the way that the Pac-12 has, and the way that maybe the Big East has, and some of the other leagues.
But I mean, Aaron, when I look at it here,
not the Big East.
With Ohio State now at number 10 in the nation in the AP, Michigan State 3 overall, Maryland in the top 10. You got 3 top 10 teams in this Big Ten conference. But I guess kind of like the bottom of the conference looks a little weaker than some of the other leagues out there, maybe, or am I wrong?
No, I agree with you guys 100%, and that was my concern, not only with the Big Ten, but the ACC this year, the Big 12 this year, I think is a little more top-heavy than it has been in years past. And that's frankly why I was a little bit impressed with what did happen in the Gavitt Games, because I thought the Big East was that conference that everybody was good, that anybody could beat anybody on a given night. And so to see Georgetown lose to Penn State, to see Northwestern beat Providence College, which I don't really have a good explanation. Like
After they lose
those
to
were
Merrimack, yeah.
What's that?
After Northwestern loses to Merrimack.
Exactly.
Who's been Division I for
exactly.
about 17 days.
It's unbelievable. And so, listen, I've been more impressed with the Big Ten than I thought I would be. I really thought the Big East, this was the year that it was really good. I thought, frankly, it was the best conference top to bottom in college basketball. I guess in theory it still might be, but, man, those were some tough losses to take. Even the games that they won, I mean, Marquette was down for a good chunk. I do agree on Purdue, by the way. I know we just want to kind of do the thing where they've made 3 straight Sweet 16s and, like, okay, they'll flip the switch and turn the corner. Like, when I watched that Marquette game, that just looked like a bunch of role players to me without a Carson Edwards, without a guy that can just go out and get 20 or 25 in a night. Now, maybe that guy emerges. I don't know. Maybe we just caught them on a bad night, although they didn't look great against Texas either, obviously, at home. Purdue's the one that I think that I was probably I was a little lower on Michigan than I should have been. They look good. There's some other teams, but Purdue is one that maybe I was a little bit too high on in the preseason. Can't speak for you guys, but I think I might have overvalued them a little bit.
I did.
There you go. No, I'm not alone.
Over in the Big East, which was the other half that did lose that. I mean,
How about DePaul?
We mentioned
all
that
right.
when you look at the standings now, amazingly, DePaul 5-0, one of the few 5-0 teams in the nation right now, basically enough.
Yeah.
But Tytel, Butler off to a real nice start as well at 4-0, and Xavier, of course, 4-0 as well.
I'll leave Xavier for our friend Mr. Stalika, but yeah, very impressed by Butler. Obviously, when you have 4 home games, you should be the favorite in all 4. But it's one thing if you're beating teams outside the top 300. When you're beating Minnesota by 8 and Wofford by 19, I think that's a good sign. They have a great coach in Laval Jordan. Their 3-point defense is one of the best in the country, under 24%. They have a senior leader at that point in Kamar Baldwin. A nice transfer in Bryson Z as a junior. He's already started, one of the few guys who started all 4 games as a junior. I think the schedule is going to get significantly tougher. They have a 4-game stretch with Missouri, Mississippi, Florida, and Baylor, but certainly a great start in Indianapolis.
Yeah, that Xavier team that's undefeated, I don't know if we've talked about their game against Missouri since last week. If Dr. James Naismith could come back today and see that game, he would have been like, you know what, forget it. It's not worth it.
If it makes you feel better,
basketball games ever played.
If it makes you feel better, Puppet, think that Xavier and Florida could potentially be matched up this weekend. Take the under, even if it's only about 80.
Yeah.
Right. Joby, let me bring you back in here and let's kind of turn over to the ACC for a few minutes. You are a Virginia alum, which I guess means that you are still going to be happy for a very long time.
Yeah.
But we saw a lot of chalk in the ACC, not much in terms of upsets. I guess, and Pitt, I don't think was a big upset losing to West Virginia, and Wake Forest stinks, and Belmont.
But Pitt beat the team that beat Florida. So, yet another reason maybe to pile on the Gators, because maybe the Noles aren't as good as we think they are, per se. But no, the ACC, it's been chalk. The first week was the week to look at, and you'll notice. If you look at all the various, and Aaron, I'm the numbers guy here with formulas and stuff. But if you look at the ACC numbers, they're very inflated right now. Doesn't matter what metric you go to, they're going to be, because the ACC had that first week of games against other ACC schools, so they're still riding off that. But I think Aaron's right. This is a conference that has probably 4 teams that are looking seriously at protected seed land, and then you've got some other teams that can compete for a berth, etc. Notre Dame's been a little bit better than expected.
Not tonight. Jesus.
Yeah. But there is some real problems at the back end. Wake Forest is even worse than I expected, and that's saying. So, it's going to be an interesting conference. And boy, it's amazing. You have a program where 2 years ago they're talking about strippers and all that stuff, and now it's in many teams' eyes a Final Four contender. So give Chris Mack credit there in Louisville. So.
Yeah, Aaron. I mean, Duke won, Louisville too. All the polls that came out today. 2 other top 10 teams in Carolina and Virginia. But I think I kind of agree with Joby, if you do as well, that after those 4 teams, you just what else is there in the ACC this year? It hasn't looked like it's had much.
Well, and that's been my bigger concern, just in the bigger picture is, and people criticize me because I've said, like, look, I think the best coaches in college basketball are in the SEC. And people said, oh, they got 4 Hall of Famers and Tony. And I'm like, yeah, they also got Danny Manning and Jim Christian and Josh Pastner and like whatever. And so, like I'm with you guys, and I'll say this, like, I do think Louisville, in a year where nobody has looked good, I've been really impressed by Louisville. I know that beating Miami is their quote-unquote signature win, but I still think doing that on the road to open the season isn't something we should look over. But on the flip side, I think even somebody like North Carolina, I think in my little top 25 that I released this morning, I had them somewhere in the late teens, because if you really watch those games, and I know that you guys have, that's a team. And like, I picked Cole Anthony in the preseason as National Player of the Year because they're kind of who I thought they were. And that you take that guy off that team, that's an NIT team right there. And they really are struggling to score in the half court. They're struggling to score when Cole Anthony isn't putting the ball in the net. So really, you take out, like you guys said, the metrics are skewing one way, because of the fact that, they played so many conference games early, but you take out Duke, which has looked good. Virginia has looked good, certainly defensively, but even the teams, that have good records, I'm not even necessarily sold on, if that makes sense.
No, it does. I mean, and when you look at the standings this time of year, everybody has 1 loss, 0 losses or 1 loss. So it's tough to look. I think it's tough to look at records, but it's just been an ACC that has been very underwhelming for me. As much as I've been impressed by a conference like the Pac-12, I've been unimpressed by the ACC this year.
We're going to find out a lot, I think, tomorrow. From a Virginia perspective, that Vermont team, as we mentioned earlier, they scared Kentucky a few years ago. Watch out. The Vermont has actually played very well this year. And so that could be a big ACC moment in a lot of ways. If Vermont were able to pull the upset, that knocks off one of the legs, so to speak, of the stool of the conference, and it could have an impact conference-wide. Yeah, Louisville and Duke will still be there, but the depth, you're all of a sudden, North Carolina's struggling this weekend. Virginia, all of a sudden, if that happens, where they can't have a team, that scores under 40.
Well, Vermont is really good, and I know that most people that listen to this, if they don't listen to Under the Radar, might not know that. But I don't, as good as I think they are, Joby, they are not ready for Virginia's back line. They might win all but this one, but
that's not going to happen. Shut down Anthony Lamb and they'll win the game easily.
Yeah,
that's not going to be hard. But
right. I would fast forward 2 days later to Toledo at Notre Dame. That is a game that the Irish should be concerned about.
Right.
On the conference, Miami, Missouri State. Missouri State struggled more than they should, but Missouri State is still capable of winning that game against a Miami team. There's a lot of unknowns there.
Let me ask you about one more team here. How about Vatech out to a 4-0 start after we all picked up to finish dead last in the conference?
I can't explain. I mean, I can explain why they're 4-0. It's because they beat Clemson on the road on November 5th and then had 3 easy home games. And they stay with an easy home game, Delaware State on Wednesday. Then it gets significantly tougher. They go to Maui. They open up with the Spartans, and then they might have to get by UCLA and Kansas. And then they come back to the States and they get to host a team called Duke on December 6th. So imagine Izzo, Self, and Krzyzewski within 2 weeks. Good luck for that. What I don't understand, Mike Young, he should be sending hate mail to Uncle Buzz for giving him this schedule. I don't know how he got these guys. He's got 5 starters who are like 6'7" or less, and most of them are freshmen. All they do is make like a couple threes a game. They're destroying teams from 3. They're one of the best teams in the nation at guarding the 3, only 20% a game. It's not sustainable. They're going to get beat up inside by big teams in the ACC. But for now, they got Landers Nolley, Naheem Elaine, Hunter Couture, all these freshmen just jacking up threes, but they're making them.
and with the deeper 3-point line on top of that this year.
Mhm.
Rocco, let's move over to the Big 12 here, where we've only have 3 losses overall for the entire conference. I think that's the best in the nation, the fewest amount of losses overall, at least. And they haven't lost a game in the last 7 days, the entire conference.
Pretty impressive. The Pac-12 has 4, so the Big 12, I will take your word for it, is probably in the lead in terms of fewest losses. I've been impressed early on with Texas. I think the hiring of Luke Yaklich after Mr. Beeline went to the Cavaliers was one of the sneakiest, best hires of the offseason. A lot of people focus on the head coaching hires, but, I mean, he was the one that orchestrated that great Michigan defense the last few years, and it's already showing up in Austin. Of course, starting the year off with a big win at Purdue. And, I mean, I've been just tracking what they've been doing defensively, and I think, their last couple of games they just played Cal Baptist and Prairie View, not the greatest competition, but a lot of similarities already taking effect early on with a really good roster. So, I mean, Texas is a team I'm looking at pretty closely. Obviously, a high-pressure year for Shaka Smart. That hire might have saved his job. Also, across the conference, I would say West Virginia, great win in the backyard brawl, 15-point win on the road. I think they were a team I put my neck on the line for in the Big 12 preview show. Good early returns on the Mountaineers, but I know they have some big games coming up.
Well, Aaron, how about this Big 12 conference? You said that you thought it was going to be a top-heavy conference, and you look, despite this great records overall, only Kansas and Texas Tech in the top 25. Oh, I guess Texas is also. There's 3 teams in the top 25 right now.
Yeah, guys, just so you know, I know you said you can edit some stuff out. This will probably be my last question. I didn't realize quite how long you guys went.
No problem.
I can take one more if you want to keep me or whatever, but I got to kind of hit the road here. But I can answer that question for you. Yeah, the Big 12. Well, listen, I mean, I think my concern with the Big 12 was I thought that there was 3 pretty established teams coming into the year. Kansas, Texas Tech, and Baylor, and everybody else had questions. I don't know that I'm that sold on Texas. I really don't. We see this every year. We talked about Purdue earlier. And with Texas, let's not forget that Texas last year beat North Carolina in Las Vegas, had a bunch of success early in the out-of-conference. Now, they lost some games too, make no mistake, but, they had some success in the out-of-conference, and once they got to Big 12 play, they were a disaster. And so maybe the Big 12 is a little bit better than I thought that they might be coming in. But, this is another one where I look at the standings and, I guess West Virginia had a nice win over Pitt the other night, but has Kansas State played anybody? And Oklahoma State, who I actually was pretty high on, I thought they could be better than I think a lot of people realize. They have a couple good veterans on that team. But I don't know. I guess they're one where I need to see more, whereas the Pac-12 has won these big kind of showdown out-of-conference games. The Big 10 obviously asserted itself well. The ACC, at the very least, Duke beat Kansas, and, North Carolina looks good at, in stretches and whatever. I don't know. Maybe I'm just not watching the right games, but I'm just not sold on the Big 12 quite yet.
All right, well, I guess we'll find that out soon. But, Aaron, I know you do have to get going, so I do want to take a chance again to thank you for joining us. And you want to shout your Twitter handle out one more time for everyone that wants to follow you?
Sure. Thank you guys for having me. I appreciate it. It was a very fun conversation. I enjoyed it immensely. My Twitter handle is @Aaron_Torres, Torres. I know we kind of hit it off the top, but yeah. You guys want to, any fan listening wants to talk hoops, whatever, feel free to reach out, all that stuff. But, guys, I appreciate you having me. I appreciate the conversation. It's a hell of a conversation. I look forward to doing this again with you guys in the future.
Great. Thanks a lot, Aaron. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
All right. And guys, I think we'll continue. We'll run through a few other conferences here just to end up the show here. I know, David, we want to talk a little bit American. I didn't get a chance to get Aaron's thoughts on the James Wiseman situation, but Wiseman, the big story in the American, he is now being held out by Memphis. That they have decided to bench him.
Yes. So last week, I guess for last week's show, that they had been advised by the NCAA that he was probably ineligible, but not necessarily technically declared ineligible. He since has been by the NCAA, and Memphis did pull him out. As far as I know, that they've filed for reinstatement. He has not gotten it. There's a good chance that he will not. So that he may be through for the rest of the year. And because I say that the way I typically am right about things, he'll probably be reinstated tomorrow.
Rocco, I got to go to you here. When you look at the American standings so far, first place, their best record overall, you just saw them tonight, is SMU with their nice road win at Evansville tonight.
Yeah, tough team. A lot of bouncy 6'7" to 6'9" guys that gave Evansville a lot of problems. You guys might have saw my tweet. I think they out-rebounded them somewhere around 48 to 25, and that was really the difference in a 2-point win. They've got a point guard, Tyson Jolly, that is tough as nails. He originally went to Baylor, left, went to junior college, and last year was recruited as the #1 junior college point guard. SMU was lucky enough to grab him. If you remember SMU's season last year, it really fell apart with a bunch of injuries. A lot of those guys are back healthy, including a guy named Chargois. He led the team in scoring, I believe, tonight. Anyway, I think this team is a lot better than they were in preseason, especially after seeing them in person today. If they can stay healthy and keep this mix of guys, and their two guards are both 6'4", they've got a pretty tough team to match up with. So with teams like South Florida and maybe even UConn, we have no idea what UConn is, falling, that I think there's room for SMU to move up.
Sleek, I know you want to address Tulane briefly, so I'll throw it over to you.
Yeah, I will ask here. I know they have an RPI of 281. I know they had nice wins against Jackson State and Northwestern State, but there's going to be at least one coach in the country, or SID, that has some explaining to do as to how they wound up getting votes in the coaches poll this week.
On that note, I'm just going to go straight over to the Atlantic 10. And Tytel, I got to throw this at you here. Because you being in the D.C. area, how about that George Washington team and their thrilling, amazing losses at home to Morgan State and American this week?
It's been rough sailing for the Colonials. And Damian Christian, another first-year coach who wishes the cupboard was not as bare. Thankfully, they beat one of the worst teams in the nation, Howard, by 14 on November 9th. Otherwise, they'd be winless. They'd
be winless and in last place in the MEAC.
Yeah, it's not good. The good news is they have a guy named Jameer Nelson on their team. The bad news is it's the Jameer Nelson Jr., who is actually playing pretty well. Still needs some work on his three-point shot, but he's a freshman. The one bright spot is Arnaldo Toro, the 6'8" senior. The big man is just dominating the boards. I think he had a 20-20 game last week, one of the best rebounders in the country, not just the 8'10", but he's going to need it. They host Harvard in a month, and I'm going to try to go and scout Harvard for my Penn folks. I don't think
and I point out they're 1-3 against the 350th strength of schedule. It's not like they're 4-0 against a bad schedule. They're 1-3 against a bad schedule.
Joby, let me stick with you. We did see a good game Wednesday night here. VCU.
Yes.
The win over LSU. Yeah.
Well, VCU's doing what VCU will. The shocker is seeing 84 points up there. That should be it. That might turn out to be VCU's season high. Because despite what people think about Havoc and the VCU way, it's actually they're a grinding team, and they successfully did it against LSU. Remember, a lot of people had them as a top 25 team at the beginning of the year. They're legitimately in there now. I think VCU will be at large worthy at the end of this year.
Oh, yeah.
With that LSU win as a hook, as long as they don't stub their toe repeatedly in the A-10, they can stub their toe a few times now. But this gives them flexibility to do that. I think they're looking at a very solid seed, maybe a Buffalo-esque, Wofford-esque seed.
Yeah, and that's about I think more so than last year, the A-10, while not great, is good enough to where if a team like VCU wins 13 or 14, they're going to be inside the bubble, and they're good enough to do that. So, yeah, VCU, I think, is definitely a tournament caliber team. Some of these other teams that have just played bye games, I mean, I think Dayton might be pretty good, although they haven't been as impressive against weaker competition. But no one really testing themselves a whole lot out of the A10. I shouldn't say no one. Davidson has, and they have failed the tests.
Yeah.
Rhodey, who I didn't think would be that good this year, nice win over Alabama yesterday, I think it was.
Well, and you know what? UMass, despite playing weaker competition, they wouldn't have been 4-0 last year, even against this.
No, they wouldn't have beaten Northwestern or Northeastern.
Yeah. So, I mean, they're an improved team. They're far away from Marcus Camby, but they are an improved team.
And we'll get into it more tomorrow when we discuss the exempt tournaments, but Dayton's about to have a big step up in competition beginning in Maui against Georgia next Monday.
Yeah.
Yeah. Let's go over a couple other teams here. Quickly, the Mountain West. Let's see if I get that on the screen here. And Joe, actually, Rocket, let me bring you back into the Mountain West here, where Utah State's, I don't think it's even on the screen yet, but they actually up to 5-0 now. They're about to move to 5-0. They're pounding San Antonio tonight. Also, New Mexico and San Diego State undefeated, but that's kind of it in the conference at this point.
Yeah, and San Diego State, end of the first week of the season, they won at BYU. Of course, BYU just went to Houston and won, so that win is aging nicely already. Aztecs have another great defensive team. I think this Utah State team we already know a lot about. If they get Cueta back sometime before conference season, I think they'll be in good enough shape to put themselves in position. And then, New Mexico is kind of the team we need to learn a lot more about. Huge game coming up for them against UTEP on the road, another sleeper team tomorrow. I'm really looking forward to that game tomorrow.
And Titel, last conference one, really quickly hit on the West Coast Conference. We already mentioned BYU a little bit with the win over Houston, but Gonzaga sitting here, number 8 in the nation, and kind of quietly number 8 in the nation. I guess they really haven't played anybody big yet, have they?
No, they're biding their time until they head to Tucson, Arizona on December 14th for the not game of the year, game of mid-December, I'll give it. Might be a trap game because they host North Carolina in Spokane the following Wednesday, and they have Washington at Washington the Sunday before. So quite a tough stretch for Mark Few. Obviously, beating Texas A&M on the road by 30 is a big deal, but it is Texas A&M, and it is this year. That being said, they're looking solid. I think that they're one of the best shooting teams in the country. But if they can win in Tucson, then I think you need to start thinking that this could be a Final Four team.
Right. And I guess the disappointing team, David, has been St. Mary's. I guess they're still getting top 25 votes. They are 3-1, but the Winthrop loss is still making us all shake our heads.
Yeah, it stings a little bit, especially losing at home, and especially I think it was kind of surprising that they went not on the road, but beating Whiskey on a neutral floor. But it's not the kind of loss that's going to sink them as long as they take care of business the rest of their way. I mean, when you play good teams that are under the radar teams, sometimes you get beat. While it was a surprise, I don't think it indicates that they're not really good or not capable of having a good season. Some of the stories in this league are, you see some bloated records, and I know it's against weaker competition, but Pepperdine 3-1, Santa Clara got a nice win, at least by their standards, 3-1. Herb Sendek, has made constant improvement, and could they take another step forward this year? So whereas Gonzaga and St. Mary's might be the only BYU getting a nice win at Houston. Right. So how many teams, is this league going to be in position to get 3 or maybe even 4 in this year?
I think 4 is a huge, huge stretch.
Yeah.
I think it's a 2, maybe 3, but yeah. But I guess on that note, let me run through each of you here for any other final thoughts. I do want to take one more shot here to thank Aaron Torres for joining us, and make certain you do check him out on Twitter and check out his podcast. But Mr. Sleeka, let me start with you. Any other final thoughts on the night and what we've seen so far the past week or so?
Well, the Xavier-Missouri game, that might have been the least offensive nationally that Xavier had played. We didn't really talk about their game against Missouri State, which was just a few days later, because this was the first notable game where a flopping call that resulted in a Class B technical for Missouri State did help to decide it late in the game. There were actually 2 such instances where Xavier missed the free throw the first time. I think it was about 5 or 4 minutes remaining in the game, but what happened in the final minute was Missouri State was trying for a three-point shot. It looked like the Xavier defender made contact. That wasn't called, but since the Missouri State player who was shooting did make kind of a flopping motion in the eyes of the ref, he did get called. Xavier hit a free throw, and they were able to survive against the Bears on that one. So,
in a nutshell, if you didn't see it, it was a stupid call.
Mhm.
Like, even if you were going to call him for flopping, there was contact, so it should have been a one-shot Class A technical and then 3 free throws for Missouri State, but it wasn't.
Joby, let me head over to you.
Well, we are in the fun time, you could say, for the J&G, where a bunch of teams like Evansville, for instance, jumps up to a 2 seed because of their wins and all that stuff. And what that does is it allows for conferences that are not under the radar conferences to be mixed with the SECs, the Power Fives, et cetera, the ACCs, on getting their leaders within the bubble. What's interesting, right now, 20 conferences have their leader within the J&G bubble. This will change, obviously, as we go forward. Interestingly enough, the American is not one of those 20 conferences. And so when we do this show, we do it by, at-large worthy multiple bid league conferences. So we should be doing 20 conferences, but Chad, next week, no American.
No American. Got it. All right. American, you're booted. Titel.
I just want to give a shout out to Auburn. Usually they have to worry about a bunch of bad off the court stuff that impacts their program in a negative way. This week's problem off the court is of a medical variety. Their director of player development, Marquise Daniels, got in a car accident. I think he's going to be okay. He's in the hospital, but they've not made it sound like it's a life and death situation. Thank God. He played at Auburn, helped them get to a Sweet 16 back in 2003. Played a decade in the NBA, and I hope that he has some money left over because medical stuff ain't cheap these days. But certainly wishing him well, and hopefully Coach Pearl will have him back on the sideline as soon as possible.
All right. Rocco.
Yeah, final thought is, just going back to St. Mary's, most years, if they lose to Winthrop at home, it's almost a backbreaking loss because they just don't schedule very well historically. This year, the Gales don't have that same concern. They will have a game at Fresno State this Wednesday, which should be potentially a quadrant 2A or 2B game by the end of the year. They'll get to host Utah State next Friday, another big game for them. Next month, they're actually going to go to Arizona State, Nevada, and Cal. They're going to play a neutral site game against Dayton. So that right there is 6 games that are usually not there for them to win, not to mention the fact that they've already beaten a Wisconsin team that just destroyed Marquette. So St. Mary's, a lot to look forward to, more opportunities. And I think if they're as good as we thought they were in the preseason and everything balances out, they'll be in okay shape.
All right, David, you want to finish off the show?
Yeah, I guess my final thought is has to do with the rankings or the computer ratings. I know Joby is the expert on this, but like we learned earlier in the week that or maybe it was last week, that the NCAA was holding the release of the net until mid-December, and the reason was when it was released immediately after Thanksgiving last year, people went nuts because it looked out of whack. Something else he said tonight was Massey, the one that does all the polls, isn't really posting them until they start to look like they make sense. And I don't know, I don't understand what it is people don't get about preseason rankings. They're an April batting average. I mean, say in Gonzaga's next game at the under 16 timeout, the very first one, the score is 7-2. Texas Arlington leads. Now, if somebody were to break into coverage and say upset alert, Arlington leads Gonzaga 7-2, that would be ridiculous and you should yell at them. But you shouldn't yell at the television for telling you that the score at that point in time is 7-2. I kind of like watching the rankings take shape and what they look like earlier in the year. And I don't know why stupid people who yell at or listen to and much less, they accommodated.
Yeah,
Release the rankings. Jeez.
and Joby, I know that you've actually posted two different rankings now. One that does take in preseason bias and therefore looks more like what people would expect, and the normal JNG as well. If you check out the tab on the website, correct?
That is correct.
Mhm.
And the example is any team who's taken a loss this early in the JNG, you're projecting the fact that those losses will be a percentage of their overall record. So I can get it. A team like a Michigan State, a Kansas, Kentucky, they're better than most likely where they are in the JNG. But sorry, Evansville before tonight. Evansville had a better resume than Kentucky. Guess what? They beat them head to head.
Yeah.
Still do.
Just a couple of things here. We didn't do much as to the upcoming games, but we're actually going to be recording another podcast again coming up Tuesday night. We're going to be looking at the upcoming All the Exempt tournaments, so check that out. It should be posted late Tuesday evening, early Wednesday morning. And then the other thing, I just want to thank all of you for not mentioning what the late game that happened up in Toronto over the weekend. And
Nobody
Rutgers would
watched
say
it. Nobody
Bonaventure,
cared.
nobody cared. So on that note, on behalf of David Griggs, Joby Fortson, John Salico, Rocco Miller, John Titel, thanks again to Aaron Torres for joining us. I'm Chad Sherwood, and we'll talk to you again real soon. And now I got to figure out how to stop this thing. There we go.
Good
Good night.
ending.